if you're considering this, give yourself grace, because we live in a culture and a society that ties our value to our productivity and how much we're earning. And as much as we may feel exhausted and burnt out, that's also seen in our culture, and so maybe even by ourselves, as a badge of honor. Look at me. I'm so busy. I'm juggling so many things. And that makes you feel valuable. And so it's not easy. It takes spiritual practice to recognize that, this is a quote I heard from someone else, that money is useful, but money is not valuable.
Hey friends, welcome to The Good Life with Michelle Lamoureux, a show for women in midlife who want to live happier, healthier, and more meaningful lives. I'm your host, Michelle Lamoureux, a self-love coach and the author of Design a Life You Love. And together we're going to be doing just that. Each week I bring on world-class experts, best-selling authors, leading entrepreneurs, and also do solo casts with the intention of inviting you to get connected to what you really desire from your life. This show is produced with love every week. There's inspiration and actionable tips in every episode because I want to see women playing a starring role in their lives instead of living on the sidelines. Be sure to join the Good Life community newsletter over at thegoodlifecoach.com for more inspiration and tips to live your best midlife. And make sure you're following the show on your favorite podcast player. I'm so glad that you're here. Hey friends, welcome back. I'm so excited. Today we're going to be talking about embracing your spiritual life with your professional life. Joining us is Laura Rotter, CFA, CFP, and the owner of True Abundance Advisors, a heart-centered, values-based financial planning firm based in New York. After a successful career managing money for institutional investors, Laura discovered mindfulness practices and was drawn to guide professionals facing a big life change to achieve both financial security and life satisfaction. Since making her shift, she's been featured in CNBC, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and is involved locally to help women with financial literacy as well as their own sense of well-being in the world. Welcome, Laura. I'm so happy to have you here.
I'm so excited to be here, Michelle.
Well, you've got a great story. I mean, Wall Street for 30 years and making a transition to go on your own. So this is also going to be a conversation around transitions and how a spiritual practice kind of plays into that and how we can really be integrating to be living our most authentic, fulfilled selves. Because I think we share that value system. And even when I left being, the world of marketing, I became a coach for that feeling that I needed something more heart-centered. So I love that your description in your bio says heart-centered, because those were literally the words that I thought about when I went to become a coach.
Yes, and I'm putting my hand on my heart. Yes.
Yes. It's so good. Now, I was a recent guest on Laura's show. I'll include it in the show notes when this episode airs. But Laura starts her podcast off with a question. And Laura, I think this is going to frame our conversation. I'm curious where it's going to go. But you ask, what was money like in your family growing up? So that's where I want to start today with you.
Oh, tough question, Michelle. It's one I've thought about, and I'll just go with my response. I'm not 100% clear on it. So I did grow up in a junior 4 rent-controlled apartment in Queens, New York, one of the boroughs of New York City. The room I shared with my sister was meant to be the dining room. We had a bunk bed. It was a tiny little space that I did not know to question. I mean, until I went to high school, friends of mine who lived in homes still lived in connected row houses. I wasn't exposed to that much wealth, at least through elementary school. And So at least consciously, I didn't feel deprived. I did go to high school in Manhattan, where very, very, very wealthy kids went to school, though my immediate friends were not particularly wealthy, though everyone did have a home. I didn't know other people in apartments. But Michelle, what I often think about is that I have one sister, so grew up two girls, and both of us became the primary breadwinners of our family. My sister right now is a managing director at JP Morgan. So I have to believe that even though consciously I didn't feel deprived, it was clearly very important to me to have money. I remember graduating from college and feeling like I want a job. I want to be earning money. And I guess another vignette I want to share, because again, I've often sort of thought about it and what did this mean? But in my day, if you were looking to have a boyfriend and wasn't quite ready to get married, you did a summer share in Fire Island. So I was with a bunch of young people in my 20s sharing a home. And I remember it was a rainy day. And so the girls, we all drove to a factory outlet shopping place, and I refused to get out of the car. I clearly was not comfortable spending money frivolously without plan. And I remember they came back to the car. I still have this to this day. They said, Laura, there is a beautiful shirt like silk. It's $5. You have to come in, you have to buy it. And I did. And it's still in my closet. But that stays with me. Like, who was I and what was my relationship to money that I wouldn't even get out of the car to browse in a shopping outlet? So I clearly had issues around money, and I blocked it. I accepted my family for where it was, and I didn't struggle with it at the time, but clearly there was something going on there.
Yeah, there's a feeling of there wasn't enough maybe, or some scarcity around it. And so you wanted to save your money because you had a bigger vision for your life. And maybe the idea of spending it created some level of vulnerability within you, not on a conscious level, but you knew where you came from and how, you didn't feel, like you said, to use your words, you didn't feel like you were deprived of anything, but you did have a sense that there was a different life that other people were having out there.
Yes. And actually, I'm smiling as you're recounting this back to me, because I do think that my father specifically set up this sense that people who have more money are bad. I have no other way to put it, but that somehow we were better because we did not have as much money as others. And we get all kinds of messages. As my father got older, I really did sense with him a sense of deficiency for not having as much money as he could have had. And I do remember when I was still living at home, so before I left to college, my father being concerned that I wasn't bringing people home because I was embarrassed of how I lived. And it had never, it didn't even occur to me to be embarrassed, at least consciously, but somehow he was embarrassed, though he didn't communicate it verbally.
Yeah.
So there's mixed messages there.
I think this is really such an important conversation. I mean, I've had financial advisors come on. I've talked about money. There's a woman who wrote a book on breadwinning, for women specifically as the breadwinners, and to go for that and have that financial security. But I think that many of us, consciously or not, create either positive associations, limiting beliefs around it. And there's so much messaging around money, which is a means to an end in many ways. It's an energetic exchange. Goods for, this paper, now it's all digital, but, there's this, but it gets so confusing and messy. And even people who are very successful in terms of what they're earning aren't necessarily saving because they want to show a life the vanity spend maybe, or something for another sense of deficiency. Like there's so many layers around it, versus some people want to have that security and maybe even could afford it. I mean, when I was on your show, I think I told you that I had a positive association, but it took me a while to learn how to spend because I was really taught to save as a way of creating a better future. So we all internalized our different messaging around it. I'm going to read something from that I read on your website because I want the audience to understand your story a bit more and how you were on Wall Street for 30 years. I mean, you were incredibly successful. You still are, but in terms of that external definition of success, I mean, to be especially a woman on Wall Street, to have lasted there and to succeeded there. You wrote, why are you crying? Asked my husband. Isn't this what you wanted? A couple of days earlier, I had been called into my boss's office and learned that I was among a group of employees being laid off with a generous severance package. Just a couple of months before that, I had written in my journal about my 27-year high-paying Wall Street career. I find my job saps the energy out of me. The physical space I work in with no windows and no privacy does not make me feel safe. In order to be in my office on time, I need to wake up by 5:30 in the morning, but I don't get to bed until 11:30 because the evening is when my real life takes place. When I teach yoga, see friends, and take classes, I was finally free. So you went through this transition after a long career, and I think it's going to be helpful for women because I know a lot of women right now in their 50s who are being laid off. I have a few friends, all like within the same time period, all just suddenly. And sometimes it's like a mixed blessing, but it doesn't always feel that way, especially when you're earning a lot of money or you are the breadwinner, you were the breadwinner in your family. So talk to us about this journey of the 30 years on Wall Street and how you ended up in that place, and what you took away from what was going on in your life.
Thank you for that question, Michelle. I really do look at my career in thirds. So my first 10 years were amazing. I did such interesting work. I was known as a generalist, which meant that I didn't focus on a particular industry. I was an analyst looking at investments and deciding whether or not we should invest institutional capital. And so maybe on Monday, I always looked at industries in distress. So maybe I'd be looking at a paging company, and then the next day, a newspaper company, and then the next day, actually, Hostess brands. It was fascinating work, and it included, what's going on in the economy and what's the management team like and what are competitors like. And it was fascinating work. So let's say that's the first decade. And then the second decade, sort of an interesting family structure for a discussion for a whole other podcast, but I have 3 kids and 2 years difference between the oldest and youngest. So I was not the primary caretaker. As I said, I was the primary caregiver. My husband, who's a physician, became Dr. Mom, and we did also have a live-in. But still, when I got home at night or when I was home on the weekend, it was just, I was on. So I didn't really think about it. It was, we put an infrastructure in place that reflected the money I was earning. So we had a 6,000 square foot home, and we had a vacation home, and my kids were in private school, and we took fancy vacations, and I didn't question what I was doing. You're sort of on autopilot. I will say that the industry, not only did I change in my last decade there, but the industry changed. I've often said that when I started, it was the nerds in high school that realized that they could do intellectually stimulating work and make a lot of money. And by the time I left, it was the frat boys in college who realized they could leverage their relationships to make a lot of money. It became about making money and not about doing interesting work. And there's many reasons why interest rates were low. So the kind of risk you needed to take was not compensated for by return. Whatever reason, by the end, like I said, the last decade, you saw what I entered in my journal. I I hated it. I didn't share the politics of the people I worked with or the worldview. I didn't find the work that interesting anymore. And, but I was trapped. I had these expenses in place.
Yeah.
And and that led to that moment where I was really trying to figure out, how do I extricate myself from this life that I have chosen to be a victim of? And I have a story. When people ask, did you ever have sort of a spiritual moment, which I know you have had, Michelle? I learned that in our previous conversation. So I took a day off from work to go to a 1-day meditation retreat in the city. And I made up my mind when coming home from that retreat that I was no longer going to be a victim. There were certain ways that I was with Citigroup at that point, and the way our group worked that I felt should be changed. Our morning meetings, we would have our backs to each other and bark at each other. So I made up my mind, I'm going to go in, I'm going to call my boss into an office, because we sat on a trading desk. There was no privacy. And I'm going to make some suggestions. And that's when he called me into his office and again told me not for cause. There was a large group being let go and I was given a severance package. But I felt like the universe was saying, Laura, you've taken control and now you're ready for the next step. And so in many ways, it was exactly what I wanted. I couldn't walk away. The money was too good. And so I felt it to be a gift. And at the same time, I slid down. My large house had a back staircase. I slid down the back staircase and just.
Oh, you fell?
Yeah, I was fine, but it was like a day or two after I was let go, and I just started to cry. Oh. And my husband, I always laugh, he's a psychiatrist, but he's an academic psychiatrist. He doesn't see patients. But he's like, wait, this is what you wanted. Why are you crying? And I'm like, you're a psychiatrist? I said, you can hold both. Yes, this is what I wanted. And yes, I have no idea who the hell I am. I've been one person for 30 years. I work on Wall Street. I earn good money. And now who am I?
Yes.
And it was exhilarating and frightening at the same time.
I love this conversation so much. And it's interesting because the friends that I have that work in finance, your story resonates from what they've shared in terms of the hours and getting up early. And if you have the kids, I mean, you didn't talk about the boys club so much, but like the idea that, in order to advance, you had to do the golf, but you want to see your kids and feeling torn. And then the other part that resonates is hearing them talk about sort of the financial handcuffs where they are making so much money. And then they're like, well, the kids are in private school. And if I just put up with it another 5 years, then I can, they have this exit plan in their mind, but their soul is kind of withering in the meantime, going, this isn't in resonance anymore. And, the people I'm thinking of are women. So I think it's interesting. And I think it's going to be helpful for them to keep hearing your story, because I think we learn from each other. We learn from the experiences. We learn from seeing ourselves in someone else and go, yeah, that's my story too, even though there'll be some differences to it. So I'm just curious, what led you to take a meditation class and take a day off and go do that? Did somebody mention it? How did that come about?
So I guess it's going to be a little bit of a involved answer. Early 2000s, I was always an exerciser, loved to sweat. I'm type A, so I was a runner and Bikram yoga. And there was a woman teaching yoga at my synagogue. And I still remember walking into the class and being like, oh, I am so out of here. I'll do this once. But, all the women were all different shapes and sizes. This isn't going to be hard driving enough for me. Robin Wald is the woman who was teaching the yoga class, and she referred to God in the yoga class. And I am someone who grew up with a belief in things you can't see. My theology has evolved. And I know God can be a hard word for people, but I I had married into a family that made me feel that I was psychotic if I actually believed in God, and so had really rejected that part of myself. And Robin brought that part back to me. And so after discovering that yoga class, I then did a yoga teacher training, which introduced me to meditation, and I became very involved and still am with an organization called the Institute of Jewish Spirituality, which merges Eastern practices with Jewish teachings. And through them, I've been on several silent meditation retreats for week-long retreats. This one it was sponsored by that organization, and it was in New York City, and it was for a day. And those practices continue to support me during change, which you and I know is what life is.
Yes.
And we really need practices that help us center.
Yes, yes, and yes. What amount of yoga and yoga training and all that was happening while you were on Wall Street? Like, were they intersected, or was it after you were let go? When did that?
While I was still working, I read a book called 90 Days to a New Life Direction. And I really
that's familiar.
know
90 Days to a New Life Direction. I'll link it. I'll look it up and link it.
And one of the exercises in the book, and this was while I was still working on Wall Street, was pick 3 professions to research. It doesn't matter whether the professions make sense. I remember one of the examples the author gave was being a clown. And find 3 people within each profession to interview. So the 3 professions I chose were yoga teacher, and I interviewed yoga teachers I was, practicing under, and because of that ended up doing a teacher training. I thought of becoming a rabbi, and I interviewed 3 friends of mine who had gone back to rabbinical school and become rabbis when they were older. They all loved going to school and writing papers. And I'm like, okay, no, not for me.
Yeah.
And the third one was financial advisor for women, and did some informational interviewing. And that led ultimately to where I am now. But the yoga teacher training, so I signed up to do a training in 2011. And the training originally was Wednesday evenings, I still remember, and like one Sunday a month. So it was something I could do while I was working. And I guess another sort of karmic story. So I did have one layoff before. I was laid off in August 2011. And so I had a severance package that lasted through the yoga teacher training. And when it ended, I had a job offer from Citigroup. And the karmic thing was I was away at my first silent meditation retreat. It was in a beautiful retreat center in California that did not have Wi-Fi. So that the requirement, which I didn't realize until I arrived, they said, we'd like you really to turn off your phone and not have contact with while you're here. And I wasn't sure I was going to do it till I realized that in my room, you had to walk, out to the edge of the property to get Wi-Fi. So on Friday, I had arrived, I think on Sunday. So on Friday, I walked to the end of the property to, send, weekend wishes to my family. And I turned the phone on, and there's a voicemail message from the head of the group at Citigroup asking if I'd come in for an interview. And it was 2000. It was a hard time on Wall Street. There were not a lot of jobs. I remember being more anxious about teaching yoga when you're in a yoga teacher training at the end. So it was May 2012. I had to teach yoga in front of the instructor. I was anxious about that. I was also going to interview at Citi. I didn't really want the job. I remember I wasn't anxious at all. I got the job at Citi in June 2012. And again, I felt like, the base salary. So forget about the bonus that I was going to make. The base salary was more than I'm earning now, So
Yeah.
I took the job, and that was my last miserable job.
Yeah. I think that's the hard thing. Those jobs are not, doesn't seem that people I know that are in them love it, but then it allows for a different lifestyle. So
Yes.
there may be women who are transitioning out of those kinds of higher paid things. Talk to us about what that was like for you and your family, because you talked about the 6,000 square foot home and the vacation home and really lovely, vacations. That's a big decision to make, to say, you know what, we're not going to have that anymore. I'm going to go out on my own. I'm going to be successful in my own way. But, a base that automatically is more than anyone might make in a few years. I don't know. You didn't say the number, but I would imagine it's high. How did that work with your family and for you? Like, how did you mentally do that?
So first of all, I really need to recognize my privilege, right? So um, I had amassed a nice amount of savings. Um, I married. My husband is an academic. And though he was the adjunct income when we were raising our children, he has a nice income, and he also has a pension, which is something we're not yet collecting it, but knowing that that's there is meaningful.
Yes.
And finally, my kids were at that time getting off the payroll. We had put them through college.
They were not little
And
kids. Yeah.
they were not little kids. So,
Mhm.
so I want to acknowledge that up front.
Yeah.
And then I want to say that's where sort of financial planning came in, which is I had this large home. We did not have a large mortgage, so that wasn't the cost, but the taxes were crazy. Every time something broke, there were at least 3 zeros attached to the expenses. The cost of heating that home and having someone, do the lawn, that was the first thing. I just knew we have to get rid of this house. It just doesn't make sense. I looked at, the overhead and what could I cut? We sold our vacation home. Frankly, the vacation home was right for when the kids were little because, everything's there. But, we like to travel. So that was an easier thing to do. The house we were in for, 20 years, and it was
Yeah.
where I raised my kids. And I have to say, Michelle, and I thought about leaving. I'm in the same neighborhood. This is my third house in this neighborhood. First, it's like the little bears. First, we had a teeny tiny house. Then we bought the big house. And now this is the just right house. And at first I thought, I don't know that I want to be so close to this home that was so meaningful to me. It might be painful to drive by. And I tell you, it's not at all painful to drive by because I have a life that I love. And it was all very clear decisions. Like, I want to have money to have fun. I want to continue to save, and I can't have the kind of overhead in place that I have now. So that was just very clear.
Yeah.
That
It
had to
wasn't hard.
be
It sounds like it wasn't that. No, it was more
done. No.
practical. You wrote also that you became an active author of your life. And I love the idea of being the author of your life. My book is Design Your Life. I think there's authorship or design. There's a creative element where we are co-creating, whether or not you believe in that higher power or whatever, but there is something that's happening. And you said the universe ushered in the starting of your company. What advice would you give to a woman who's in that transitional place, who knows she's going to be done or is done where with that sort of, the words that are coming to mind are like a rat race or something. I don't know. I don't really love that phrase as I'm saying it, but that's sort of the energy that I'm feeling around it, and wants to really start embracing what she feels where she should be going, or even if that's just creating a life that feels a little bit more centered and peaceful and intentional. What can you offer since you've walked this path already?
So several things come to mind, right, from the spiritual and from the practical.
Yeah.
First, want to start by saying if you're considering this, give yourself grace, because we live in a culture and a society that ties our value to our productivity and how much we're earning. And that as much as we may feel exhausted and burnt out, that's also seen in our culture, and so maybe even by ourselves, as a badge of honor. Look at me. I'm so busy. I'm juggling so many things. And that makes you feel valuable. And so it's not easy. It takes spiritual practice to recognize that, this is a quote I heard from someone else, that money is useful, but money is not valuable. What's valuable is relationships. What's valuable is, doing good for others. And we need to understand that if we make other kinds of decisions, it's actually countercultural. So first of all, give yourself grace and have the practices to do that. Now, the practical, how much money do you need to live? Understand that. And then, do you have the resources to make a change? I mean, certainly I didn't expect my financial planning practice to be profitable when I first started. And I knew that I had financial resources that would enable me to go through a period of time where I wasn't earning, forget about what I was earning before, that I wasn't really at the beginning earning any money, and, that I wasn't going to earn anywhere near what I earned before. So what did I need? What do I need to live a valuable life? And everybody defines that differently. It's important to me, as an example, to share experiences with my children who, I feel blessed that they actually seem to like to hang with me, so I want to be able to afford to take the family away when we go on vacation. I want to be able to afford to buy them gifts. So that is part of what I find valuable. And so making decisions accordingly. I, for example, chose not to become a yoga teacher when I said, I'm going to have an Instagram account and post pictures no matter what, right? You have to build followers, you and I know. Do I want to build followers to charge $20 for someone to come practice yoga with me? Or do I want to actually help someone understand their finances and make the kind of transition that I did? So that was a practical decision as well as a mission-driven decision. So I think it's important to recognize what your values are and then look at your financial resources and make sure that your resources can support that. I actually have on my wall, I do an exercise with all my clients to help them identify their top values, and mine are spirituality, family, meaningful work, play, and health. And so as I make decisions for myself, I try as much as possible to keep those values in mind.
Yeah, I think all of what you said is so important. Let me ask, though, because there may be people who have certain values and they want to be able to do the vacations and all the other stuff. So this is something that I sit with, and even when I work with people, it's like that balance of pursuing what your heart is calling you to do, the practicality of bills, finances, mortgage, schools, whatever it is, taking those vacations, the things that you want to provide. Obviously, everybody has to make that decision themselves, but how do you do that analysis between, if you don't have, let's say, the partner who maybe has an income that can support and sort of cover you until you make it, if you will? Like, what do you think about that? How do you approach that? Because you might have clients who struggle with this too.
So several things come up for me. So recently I was talking with another advisor, and it's interesting. You tend to have one or the other. Either you have clients that at the end of the day, it's their money. So, but they may make decisions that scare the shit out of you. Like, really, and then you have other clients that you're like, you can spend your money, you can retire.
Yeah.
And as we started this conversation off with, there's so much beyond just the dollars and cents that goes into your financial decision making. I've had several clients, right? I certainly advocate, I stand as an example of and advocate walking away from, let's say, guaranteed income in order to pursue something that speaks to your heart. And I have had several clients that when they started to work with me were entrepreneurs. And then one of their, they were working as consultants, and one of their clients offered them full-time jobs and they took it. And frankly, it wasn't, didn't make the most financial sense. One of the wonderful things about not being a W-2 employee is that you can actually write off more expenses against your income. But they just wanted to know that they had guaranteed income. And then I've had the opposite, people with vacation homes and kids who are young. So who are like, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm leaving. We monitor the resources till, they figure out what the next chapter is in their lives. So everybody ultimately has to make their own decisions, some of it based off of, resources, and some of it based off of emotions. And one thing I guess I want to say, given how we started this conversation, Michelle, is a nonprofit once invited my daughter and I to do a money session together. There were a bunch of mothers and daughters doing this. And that was when I heard my daughter say, you were always, I thought I was so generous. You were always restrictive about money. You always, and I know that I do have, right? We started off saying I'm not clear, but I do have fears around money that aren't necessarily tied to my financial resources.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I should be spending money on that. And I guess that does come through at times to my children.
Yeah, this is so good. And also the fact that you read off those core values. I mean, one of the things with coaching, one of the very first exercises you do when you go through coach training is to assess those core values. And maybe, some of those change, but it's what is a priority for you now, and aligning that. And also, those old money stories and how they're not always rational. And I'm thinking, actually, we got connected through Manisha Thakor, who wrote Money Zen. And so, she was in a position where she was financially free if she wanted to be. And she didn't even realize it until one day, she was helping a friend and realized, oh, wait a second. She was doing her own portfolio and realized, Manisha was like, oh my God, I could live like 3 times this life and still I would never have to worry about money again. And all of a sudden, like, the awareness shifted. And so I think it's a journey. It's not a straight line, and you have to know your comfort level, and maybe you're playing with it. It's not necessarily like, okay, this is the path, you're going to go out on your own, or you're going to go get the job. It might be a little bit of a hybrid or something.
Exactly. And I guess I am a firm believer, given the people I come in contact with, that everybody is going to be okay. And maybe that's faith-based. I did once say this to my mother-in-law, and she looked at me cross-eyed. It doesn't mean that I know that I'm never going to have to sell this house. And I just know that it'll be okay. We'll always be able to eat. We'll always have shelter. We'll always have medical care. We'll always have each other. We'll have the things that are valuable. And so that's true for my clients as well. I really do feel like certainly people I'm working with, have a certain level of financial resources. And though it might be scary, if your heart is urging you to take a risk, because life is nothing but risk. We imagine that, if I add another zero to my bank account, then I'll be in control. We're not in control. And so if your heart is urging you to do something, I love to be a sounding board to help people make those decisions. So you're not doing it blindly without any input from the finances. But I don't think finances should have the last word, because you may think you're staying right. I'm an example. You think you're staying with the most stable job, and you're not. Things change.
Yeah. Yeah. This idea of control. Exactly. It's so true. We're not necessarily in control of what we can, and control what you can while you can. Right.
Yes.
I mean, it's a dance, no doubt. Let's just touch upon, before we wrap up, the spiritual side. And what advice would you give to somebody who, or how could they maybe integrate or think about meditation or other practices as a way of getting them recentered and reconnected to themselves? I mean, that's a big part of what we talk about in the show. And I'm always a big fan of what you said. If you're hearing, I call it the inner whisper, that inner voice, pay attention. That's your soul reminding you why you're here. It's literally your soul talking to you. So we have to at least pay attention to that. But what role could a spiritual practice play in that? Any advice on that?
I think it's really almost impossible, Michelle, in this culture again, to hear that still small voice if we don't have some sort of practice. I don't want to define it as spiritual. I certainly was a runner for many years before I discovered meditation. And I do think, the 45 minutes I would go out for a run and just get into the cadence of my breath was very meditative, even before I found formal meditation. And there's so much coming at us from social media, from TV, from advertisements, which are on everything nowadays, that it's hard to know, is it you who wants the BMW, or is it just the fact that, both your neighbors on either side bought the Tesla, and you feel, you need time alone with yourself, which is, again, something that we don't ordinarily do. And so whether it's meditation, whether it's exercise, I will say that for me, this current period of time, the last couple of days has been rather agitating. And last night, and I was exhausted. I got the COVID vaccine yesterday. I was pretty tired. I rolled out my yoga mat and I just did 45 minutes of a yoga class, just grounding, feeling the earth underneath me. And it centered me and helped me to feel better. I personally think I'd be a basket case without my spiritual practices. And again, everybody needs to find it for themselves. I will say, for years, my husband not only wasn't a meditator, but he always almost looked like he was going to throw, like anything spiritual turned him off. He discovered Headspace, the Headspace app, and all the men in my family, I have 2 sons and a daughter, are very, very competitive. And somehow my son and my husband became competitive about who was meditating more. And my husband became a meditator. And it wasn't, he'll now say it was my influence. I don't know that it was. So you have to find your own path in to spending time alone with yourself. But I think it's important, especially for, women in a life transition.
Yes. Love it. And I love that you said that it could be that run, a lot of women, maybe it's that, or the spin class. It's something that's getting you in your body, into your physicality, connecting you. And then that grounding is so essential to hearing that small whisper that's there. It's always there. We just, like you said, that's how we're going to get access to hearing it. What didn't I ask you today? Anything that you want to leave the women listening with today?
What's coming up for me just around this last discussion is actually not only hearing the still small voice, but then following up and making decisions, taking that into account. I see so many of us doing, should I leave my job and such? And there's the pros and the cons, and the cons are longer. And um, again, we're taught not to actually follow our inner voice. And I think it's important to trust it and to listen to it. And I love that this podcast is geared towards women in transition to have their best life. I also speak to that audience in my podcast that you were such a wonderful guest on, which I call Making Change with Your Money. And so I hope also that the stories shared by my guests are an inspiration for others in a similar period of life.
Absolutely. It's that remembering, the invitation to the remembering. That's what I say. Why you're here, that voice knows, even if we're not encouraged to follow it, it's there for a reason, and it's connected to a much wiser, higher self. So
Yes.
I've loved this conversation so much. All of the show notes for today will be over at thegoodlifecoach.com. I'll have a link to all your social media and, everything we talked about. I just for fun like to end the conversation with your definition of a good life. So with everything that you've gone through and where you are today, how would you define what a good life means to you, Laura?
I love that question, Michelle. And it goes to why I named my firm True Abundance Advisors, because I believe true abundance is the allocation for you of our three scarce resources, which, of course, money, but also time and energy. And as I look at my life now, I feel truly abundant. I have time freedom, which I didn't have for so many years, that I can choose who I spend my time with, how I spend that time. And I want everyone to recognize it becomes more transparent as we age, that our time on earth is not unlimited. And we don't get a do-over, as I've said many times. So make sure you're living it in a way that makes you feel truly abundant.
I love it. And I love that it is True Abundance is the name of your business and, the work that you do, because we started off talking about money, but really what we're really seeking is abundance. It's beautiful. Yes. I've loved this time with you, Laura. Thank you so much. Again, the show notes for today will be over at thegoodlifecoach.com. Share this interview with a friend, anyone you're thinking of who came to mind. There's a reason, share it. Anyone in transition or, uncertain about how to incorporate more of those practices that do ground us and do help us stay within the flow of your life, because our lives are always speaking to us. Such a pleasure being with you. I've got my hand on my heart now, Laura, because I really love connecting with you on your show. That was such a treat. And now to have you here as well.
Bye-bye, Michelle. It was wonderful.
Thanks so much for tuning in today. I hope you gained some new information or inspiration for your life. That is the essence of this show, is to really wake up to what's possible for you, to reclaim your beautiful voice, and to really learn to love and prioritize yourself. So if you gained any value from any of the conversations you've tuned into, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast player. You can do that right now on your phone. And please do consider leaving a rating and review if you have yet to do so on Apple Podcasts. It's actually how more women can find the show. And I really want to grow a community of women who are loving themselves and living full on. So thank you as always for tuning in. And I look forward to reconnecting with you next Wednesday. Bye for now.